I'm Ben Ryman, and this is Behavior Speak. In this conversation, Dr. Danielle Jeudy discusses the pervasive issue of colorism and its implications in various cultural contexts. This discussion covers the practice of skin bleaching, the impact of skin tone on education and employment opportunities, and the role of media in shaping perceptions of beauty. Dr. Jeudy also shares insights from her research on colorism through the lens of behavior analysis, highlighting the importance of language and family dynamics in perpetuating color identity. This conversation concludes with a call for future research to explore colorism beyond traditional racial frameworks, emphasizing the need for a broader understanding of how skin tone affects individuals. All right, welcome to Behavior Speak, Danielle.
Thank you, Ben. How are you?
Yeah, awesome. Stoked to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge I am producing this podcast on the lands of the Kalamin, Taihu, Somoko, and Comox First Nations. As always, grateful to be here. It's June 2025 we're recording. We're a week away from the summer solstice and Indigenous Peoples Day, and just enjoying reflecting even more. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about yourself, Danielle.
So I am a BACB. I recently graduated last year with my PhD in behavior analysis. I'm also a wife and mother of twins. I have girl-boy twins, and I always say girl first because she was born first, and so most people say it the other way around. I also work as an adjunct faculty at a university, primarily doing practicum and also some other main. I'll be soon adding psychology to that list in the fall. I'm looking forward to, teaching something a little bit different outside of behavior analysis specifically. For work, I'm primarily working for a nonprofit with adults who have intellectual and developmental disabilities in a wide range, as young as 21, as old as 82. And so there's a lot of stuff in between that realm. I still do work with children from time to time, mostly in-home, and then I have my own business in which I consult with families and also organizations doing training and or just providing them with support, whether it's reviewing BSPs or looking at their policies and procedures, depending on what they need depends on what I provide to them. So generally, that's me in a little bit of a nutshell.
Yeah, a little bit busy for sure.
Yeah.
Tell me how you got into all this.
So the long story
Yeah.
is that I was a pre-med bio student. So I guess I had it in my cards to be a doctor in some capacity. It just didn't end up being the original one that I thought it would be. And so I was, a tad bit of an overachiever. I finished my bachelor's degree within 3.5 years. So I had another term in order to just take some classes because it was already paid for. And I decided to get a minor in psychology during that specific term. So I just did the few classes that needed to be done. And in one of those classes was an exceptional child psychology course. And that instructor was the superintendent for a pretty big sending district within New Jersey. So I did forget to mention that I'm from New Jersey. As the superintendent, he talked a lot about autism, and at the time I had no idea what he was talking about. He talked about the school. They were building a new school, which was like this massive campus type place that would hold basically all students from 3 to 21. So I did really well in his class, and at the end of that term, he offered me a position. I was graduating, and then he offered me a job to work at the school. Had no idea what I was doing, and I just said, okay, I like kids, cool. And I ended up working in preschool with like the little babies. And from there, I kind of just continued to work there over the summer. It was just a summer job. And so I just worked there over the summer while I did some other full-time work, which I was working at like a residential treatment center for boys who had some pretty intense and severe problem behavior. So I was doing that in the evening and working at the school during the day for the summertime. So I kind of sometimes felt like Dr. Jekyll and Mrs. Hyde, like, because you had to, the approach was a little bit different. You had to be very kind of stoic and stern within the residential center because, it was a lot of manipulation and those kind of things were happening.
Mm.
And so then you're like super bubbly during the day and then had to kind of turn it off because if you were too nice, they would try to take advantage of you. So I continued to work there for probably about 9 years. And eventually, through that time, obviously, I learned more about ABA. I learned about the different positions that were within the field as far as being a BCBA. And I decided to, as I continued through getting, going back to school to get my master's and all those things, I finally decided this is something that I want to pursue. I think I hit a roadblock. Well, no, I don't think. I hit a roadblock when it came down to gaining supervision. And so I was not because I eventually at that time when it came time to supervision, I was actually working at that larger school as a full-time TA. And they offered supervision, but they did not offer it to TAs. They only offered it to actual certified teachers at the time. So I had to pay for supervision out of pocket.
Wow.
And that led me to not be able to afford it at some point. So I did all this work, could not afford to pay because I think at that time people were charging anywhere between like $75 and $90 an hour. And so it got pretty expensive for someone who was working as a TA, as you can imagine, and still, living life regular. So that's kind of how I got into ABA, but my path was not linear by any means. And so I had to switch. Ended up leaving the school because I needed to find a job if I was going to do this work that offered supervision. So I ended up finding the job that I'm currently working at, which allowed me to work full time as well as gain supervision hours that they was a part of my job. I wasn't charged for it. And so
Yeah.
I got lucky in that regard that I was able to not only have we partnered with another organization. So I had about 3 or 4 supervisors at the time. So I was able to also get a lot of experience from people who had different backgrounds and also had different ways of doing things. And so at that point, I got a little bit lucky because I was able to work with a lot of different BCBAs who had a lot of different experiences. And I was able to kind of move through them kind of fluid depending on what situation and what case. It also gave me the opportunity to do a lot of stuff that some people don't get to do, like FAs and things like that, which is, hard, particularly if you're not working in a clinic setting or a university style location that has kind of like that controlled setting. So it did give me that opportunity as well. So that's my long story for how I got to ABA. And then I continued on the journey as, doing this program. I also always tell the joke that I also took the extra long way because I got a master's and then the board decided to change the requirements that in order to get your BCBA, you had to have one of those 3 degrees. And so my degree was not specifically in those areas. It was in child advocacy and public policy. And so then I had to go back to school after doing the ABA CERT program. I had to go back to school to do an additional class, take additional classes in order to get my master's in special education in order for me to take the BCBA. So I was a BCABA first for about a year while I was taking the coursework. So my current supervisor just told me, just take the BCABA exam. You'll at least get to work and be credentialed in that capacity while you're finishing the coursework to get a second master's degree. And then at least, you'll have this opportunity to kind of go back. So I did that. And I was lucky the university that I did my cert for, I did have to fight a little bit, but they were able to allow me to they took all my credits from the cert and they allowed me to just take the 4 or 5 classes I needed in addition to those classes to get my master's. So it wasn't like I needed to do a full 2-year program. It took me about a year to do the other program, like to add on those additional classes. So I did have to do that as well. And then the board changed the rules again that those things that the specific degrees didn't matter. So, going up and down on that roller coaster was fun.
Yeah, that's
Not fun.
wild. You have to get 2 master's degrees.
Yes, yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. And not necessarily by choice. I mean, it turned out, beneficial for me, but
Hmm.
financially it was not,
Well, this is it. I
something.
mean, what a bang on the wallet. I mean, and a lot of folks would not have the means, and that's you may not have had the means. I mean, probably loans and all those sorts of things. Do you have a certification with the International Behavior Analysis Organization, the Qualified Applied Behavior Analysis Credentialing Board, the Behavior Analyst Certification Board, or are certified through your region's Behavior Analyst Credentialing Board? You can earn continuing education units for this episode by going to www.behaviorspeak.com and clicking on CEUs. The first secret word is box.
Hey y'all, it's Quintara Tucker here, aka the Mystical Analyst on Instagram. Now, let me ask you something. Are you stuck exploring different career paths in ABA? Do you need to update that resume or CV? Or have you ever dreamed of speaking at different ABA conferences but don't know where to begin? If the answer is yes, then my 4-week virtual multicultural mentorship program is for you. During the program, we'll dive into career growth, branding, public speaking, and more. And you guessed it, all through a culturally responsive lens. We meet once a week, starting August 4th, all the way through August 25th. And don't worry, if you cannot attend live, the sessions will be recorded. Spots are limited, so join us and start becoming the BCBA that you are meant to be. For more information or to sign up, click the link in my Instagram bio or visit www.qbconsulting11.
Yeah, and I got really lucky that my dad is very much into education. He also has his PhD, and
Nice.
so he was able to provide me with the funds to pay
Yeah.
and help me to pay for that, so I did not have to get loans.
Amazing. Yeah.
I think he felt bad for me
Yeah.
ultimately
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I was really bummed to get so far with all my supervision and all those things, and then to have the rug pulled out from under me. So I was
Yeah.
really banging my head against the wall during that time. So I think he did feel bad for me. So I was blessed in that way that I didn't have to take out loans to get that
Hmm.
second degree. But
Hmm.
yes,
Yeah, it'd be interesting
it
to
was
hear.
definitely trying times.
It'd be interesting to hear stories from folks who kind of were getting certified in that period and had to, went and got a full master's degree, thought they were ready to go, and
Hmm.
then and essentially got told, no, that's not good enough. Now we need
Right.
even more.
Yeah.
And it's and it just seems such backwards thinking to sort of force people into this sort of compartment of masters in ABA, masters in whatever, and not
Hmm.
have any education in sort of these other areas. And I think we're seeing this right
Right.
now in our field that a lot of folks are struggling because they're lacking in training in certain areas they wouldn't have gotten these programs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's sometimes why we have such a narrow focus that ABA is about autism,
Mm-hmm.
which it's not. Because, at that time that was the focus. It was on special education. It was on specifically ABA, or I think the other one might have been psychology. Realistically, for those who are pursuing the career, where are you working? You're working in schools, you're working in
Mm-hmm.
clinics, you're working. I don't even know if in-home was really that big back then, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
you're working in homes.
Yep.
In those environments, those individuals either had autism or some other related disability. So you kind of get pigeonholed into having to do that work, even if that's not what you want to do.
Yeah, yeah. I want to get more into your doctoral work and some of the stuff you're doing now, but I want to hear a little more about this other master's degree because it sounds pretty cool. Child advocacy and public policy. Can you tell me a little bit about why you got a degree in that area and kind of some of the stuff that you focused on there?
Sure. So, I mean, I actually did not want to do social work, and
Mm,
so I struggled with knowing that social work really wasn't my thing.
mm,
And maybe it's personality, or it just
mm,
wasn't my interest at the time. It wasn't something that I really was interested in doing. I was interested in the work, but I necessarily wasn't interested in the position and all the things that came with it, and kind of the emotional toll, and those things just didn't really align with what I was interested in doing. So I
sure.
was seeking another type of program. And so the university that I went to, they had this child advocacy and public policy program. And it was really interesting. It was a program that had like different disciplines. So it had social work, psychology, sociology, law. And so it really kind of focused on how you keep children safe in different capacities. And so we learned about interviewing skills. And so we had to fully go into like that aspect. We learned a lot about the law as it relates to not Danielle's law, Megan's law, wrong field, Megan's law, and some of those other things that you have about like the tier systems for sex offenders and things like that. So it really focused more on how we can be advocates for children in different capacities, whether it was through like your what we consider now DCPNP, or like your child protection agencies that we have. And so a lot of the individuals who were in my program were from those child protection agencies. And so, or they worked in either the court systems, they may have been legal guardians or guardians ad litem. So a lot of them were in those kind of professions. So it was really interesting to kind of hear about those things. And so it was, for me, it was kind of like my little slice of social work, but it wasn't putting me in this box that I could not do anything else besides those things. And so I really enjoyed that program overall.
Yeah.
I think the diversity of instructors and like just not being able to, like I said, learn about one area, so that multiple disciplinary approach was really important for me. I'm kind of like a lifelong learner, I think someone told me. I really like my education like I like my food. I like to have a little bit of different things. And so if it's kind of a one note, I get bored very easily. So
Yeah.
as you can see with me doing a whole bunch of stuff.
Sure. So do you think there were some skills that you kind of took from that program that you use a lot in your current work?
Absolutely. I think so. For me now was really just that ability to listen and to take in what people are saying, to be able to dissect the information that I'm getting and kind of weed out, okay, what's important, what's not important, what's being inferred, what's not. And so that one class that I talked about, the interviewing class, is the one that stuck out to me the most.
Yeah.
When I say intense, it was pretty intense because we were like, oh gosh, it's like, and maybe it was the instructor was just like, pretty into his job and what he did. And I think he might have been like a detective or something like that. So
Wow.
that was so we're learning from people who act like this is his job. And so we learned a lot about child advocacy centers and those centers so ultimately they have this approach where the child is interviewed once and everyone is basically able to watch and gain the information that they get from the one single interview, and with the goal of not being able to re-traumatize this kid
That's
over and
brilliant.
over again. So I don't have to talk to the social worker and then the psychiatrist and then this person. So it's one person doing the single interview and trying to hit all of the points in the areas that all the professionals that are involved with the case are going to need to know. And so that was really cool to kind of see how those things were formulated. And then obviously we got to practice and kind of do it and role play within that course. So that one was really interesting to be able to, again, listen for those different areas of need. And so for me, I really took that kind of skill base and moved it over to what I do now, because like I'm talking to parents, and of course, they're telling me about their child, but there are other elements that are important for me to know. The family dynamics,
Yeah.
who's involved, who's not so much involved, who do I want, who do they want to be involved in their child's care, and also just like other things that are important to them, whether it's their religious background or maybe it's how they see education. And so sometimes you get to, I can navigate around certain things where I'm like, this is why they maybe are accepting of this, because have high regards for education. And so even though their child might have autism, they still have high regards for education. Like those values aren't going to change for them. And so I now have to kind of swerve a little bit so that they find meaning in what we're doing, even though it's the same thing I'm doing anyway that is important for the kid, but I'm trying to rephrase it and reframe it for the parent to really show them that this is important, that this, in that case, may, lead to the path of more education and more skills and things like that. So for me, that interviewing class was really something that I took and kind of carried on, because it did allow me the opportunity to kind of see how you can ask questions in a way that provides you with the maximum amount of information that you can get,
Yeah.
even if it's not necessarily the scope that you're looking for.
Yeah, well, I even think about parents who, where when we get to parents and they've already seen the speech path, they've already seen the OT, they've already seen the psych, they've already seen the doctor, they've probably seen three
Hmm.
versions of you and
Yep.
so on. And they're already sort of coming in with sort of this lens of aversion to have to speak to you again and tell their whole story all over again. And so to have that sort of framework, I think would be a brilliant sort of, I think a brilliant way for like an early intervention center to work. And so let's get all five of the different professionals come in and watch one person do an interview and get all that information once.
Yeah, no, I think it's funny because I think there was one guy who in New Jersey, he tried to do something very similar to that. I don't know how it went because I wasn't a part of it. It was just more of a concept, but I really wish that could be something that we kind of consider and take with us, that's important for, again, how many times do I have to tell you the same story
Yeah.
over and over again or go through my background history? And as like a parent, so even for me, I went through that when my kids were younger. My kids were born premature, and so they
Hmm.
had early intervention.
Hmm.
And so, yes, I'm a professional, but in that role, I was the mom. And so they had
Hmm.
speech therapy and they had the early interventionists coming in to work with them. They also had OT as babies. So at 6 months, they were in OT. And so to, again, going through all these evaluations that have to be done every 6 months or so. And then
Hmm.
having, like you said, different professionals coming in. And then I moved county. So that turned into restarting this thing all over
Hmm.
again and having to do it all over from scratch. So it is exhausting
Hmm.
to go through all of this history and when were they born and da 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 da, what services, and then they're like, they want to know dates and I don't know. Like at this time, it's been so long, kind of moved past like, but what age did they do this? I don't, I don't know. I don't know the answers to those questions, and so
Yeah.
sometimes if it could just be documented once
Yeah.
and carried through. And then, like you said once and allow people to have the opportunity to just get all the information they need in one setting. It'll make it easier for the kid. But also, if you think about testing, I think about my kids, they've done the same evaluation
Hmm.
several times. And so I question, in the end when they said, oh, they're doing well, they don't need early intervention or they don't need further assistance in school. And I'm like, okay, great. But I still question, how valid is that test if they've done the same exact tests over and over and over again over the
Hmm.
last 2 years? And so if you think about it from a testing perspective, it would probably be have a little bit more validity if,
Yeah.
or reliability maybe if there was not this kind of test retest over and over again and they,
Yeah.
match me
Yeah.
to it.
Don't really seem to be trusting the results, do they?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think the struggle would be number one, who's going to conduct the interview? Who on that team is going to do it? And
Mhm.
are they going to take into account sort of every professional's needs? And I think this has been
Right.
a struggle for our field for a long time is that,
Yes.
we don't necessarily agree that maybe everything the OT does is evidence based. And maybe we
Mhm.
don't want to ask about sensory needs and, or the speech path. Maybe we don't want to ask about those sorts of areas. So you'd almost need a sort of a collaborative team to come up with a sort of a standardized questionnaire similar to some of these other tests, but for talking to the parents. So unless you've got a really good clinic, it could work maybe in an individual clinic setting where you've got four
Mhm.
different professionals that all work well together and collaborate. But yeah, no, I think
Yeah.
people don't think about that when they sort of put folks through this stuff over and over and over again. I know our work, we are often getting folks that have grown tired of the system or have
Yeah.
been in the system for decades. I work a lot with adults as well. And now you're getting sort of like 60, 70, 80-year-old mothers, having to answer these questions that they've been answering literally for the last 75 years.
They're
And they're
sick of
just
us.
exhausted. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They are sick of us for sure. And that brings a good point. So and for the adults that I work with, I'm often just like, listen, we're talking about here and now. And sometimes I don't even ask about their history because in some capacity it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, they may have smeared poop when they were 4, but
Sure.
at 40, if they're not doing it today, it's not much relevance
Mm.
to me because I'm treating them as the individual and the adult that they are
Yeah.
today and not as a 4-year-old. And so sometimes I don't ask about the history just because it's
Mm.
daunting to go down the long line of
Mm.
questioning And sometimes I don't want to hear all the when they were 5, and I'm just like, but
Mm,
I want to hear about now. So I try to like
yeah.
skip through like a lot of the history stuff, just without a lot of the details, I guess.
And I feel like, so you say, digressing a bit, but you feel like you bring up another really excellent point. We've been learning more about this, about sort of the baggage a lot of our adults with intellectual disabilities carry, from because everything is on record, everything is on file, everything is on paper going back forever and ever and ever. I mean, I do a lot of supervision now, and I've been talking to sort of my supervisees and as well as sort of other organizational folk about, some of the stuff that we document about these folks. And, without their consent, we're putting things on that paper that they never consented to. And now someone is going to see that paper 30, 40 years from now and know all about that. And, I feel like we should at least have something similar to what, the legal system has, where, the under 19 file is sealed, the juvenile file gets sealed, the adults don't get to see it unless there's some sort of extenuating circumstance. I think they should be doing that with sort of child records as well. So these adults who are coming in with all these new human rights, and because they're adults now and they have the rights and self-advocacy and self-determination, shouldn't have to carry this baggage of 19 years of wild behaviors they engaged in when they were just hitting puberty or just learning to crawl or whatever, and forever I'm going to be known as the kid that smeared poop on the wall.
Yeah, and so Ben, don't get me down on that soapbox, but that's a totally separate conversation. But yeah, it's a very important one. So I 100% agree. So one of the strategies I kind of, I have this golden rule. I'm like, if you're not the same person 5 years ago, well, we hope. And so we hope that you've learned and grown from the mistakes that you've made or the things that you've done. And so I'm not really thinking about this adult individual from 5 years ago. I'm talking about them now, maybe within the last year or two at best. But I'm not looking back 5 years to determine what I'm going to do today, because I'm hoping with progress that they're not the same individual, just like I would hope that someone doesn't judge and or take account what I did 5 years ago and and try to make me change my behavior today for something that I did in the past. So I totally agree. I think that's just I'm very cautious and careful about a lot of the behavioral definitions that I use, about a lot of the language that I use as I'm describing or naming behaviors, just because, like you said, they do hold weight and people do see them and they carry, unless it is what it is. If that's what it is and there's no getting around it, that's one thing. But in many cases, you get individuals that have public masturbation. And I'm like, okay, they were not masturbating. Pulled out their penis or put their hand in their pants. It's not the same thing. It sounds a lot more sexual than it really was, and that's not fair to the individual to
it's much
that way.
It's much like the drunk 19-year-old peeing in the alleyway who gets called for indecent exposure.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, right, exactly. And that's still the same thing. Again, we would hope that that's not on their resume when they're looking for a job at 25.
Absolutely.
But they can, wipe it away and never talk about it again. But here we are discussing it over and over and over every year, every meeting, every transition.
Yep.
Sometimes it's just too much.
Totally. Danielle, you and I have a similar sort of history I haven't gotten into around work. So I think we'll have to have a separate conversation about all about adult services sometime, because I love talking about that stuff.
Yes, absolutely.
Let's move ahead. So you got 2 master's degrees, got a BCBA and so on. What made you decide to do a PhD?
I would say boredom in some capacity.
Lifelong learning?
Yes, lifelong learner. I really do enjoy, and I enjoy going to school. I enjoy learning. I enjoy learning about different things. And so I think I kind of hit like a wall where I just said, okay, it wasn't about work, or it wasn't about my career access or getting a better job or getting more money. For me, it was really just something that I personally wanted to do. And I personally wanted to pursue. I didn't know it was going to happen in the way that it happened, but it was something that I just wanted to pursue. And it's like I told you, my dad has his PhD. And so he's forever been saying, oh, well, whenever you get ready, I know you're going to go back. I'm just like, leave me alone, sir. I'm not doing it. He's like, you will one day. One day you'll be ready. And so then when I finally decided to start applying, he's like, I told you. I'm like, I said, you cursed me with this with this desire to keep going
Yeah.
back to school. Is your fault. Like, it's definitely you. So yeah, it really was a personal decision. It had nothing to do with anything outside that would come from it. It was just more so something that I desired to do. So I just picked up and started applying, and then the pandemic happened. So
Yeah.
that
Well,
was
that
the
must have
decision.
made doing your PhD a really enjoyable process, because I think a lot of folks do get into this for, a particular goal in mind. They want to be a researcher, they want to be a prof, they want to get better pay, they want to get a better job, and so
Mhm.
the motivation isn't just the work, and you were in there solely for the learning.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I'm still doing this. I'm a year post. I'm still doing the same job I was doing when I start. Like, there's nothing actually changed much. I've been doing more presentations and kind of speaking engagements, but besides that, and I think that's primarily just based off of the topic that I chose to pursue. But besides that, no, it was definitely for my own personal benefit. So yes, I actually really enjoyed beyond the late nights and the crazy coursework. I did enjoy overall the program that I was in. I
That's
can't
awesome.
complain. Yeah.
So let's get on to the topic. So what kind of inspired you to explore colorism in your research?
So I had in one of my classes, which my professor in that class ended up being my chair for my dissertation and my comps project. We always have to do a hypothetical study that we run, or, we frame out that's relevant to the class. And this was a verbal behavior class. And verbal behavior wasn't an area, I think because I've been working in adult services for so long, verbal behavior wasn't an area that I don't
Yeah.
necessarily use that information. It's not something that's really 100% relevant to my work on a day-to-day basis. So it was something I had to kind of think outside the box for. And I think at that time, like I said, my program started in August of 2020. And so that was like right at the start and peak of the pandemic. And so you had all those things with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all those things happening that was, specifically racially motivated, and a lot of conversation about race and racial bias and things like that. And so I think because I was also reading a lot of that information, I didn't want to go down that road in regards to verbal behavior, but I did stumble across a couple other studies that were talking about colorism. And I always kind of use this reference. I'm not the darkest Black person you can find, but in my family, if you're talking about in context, I am what everyone considered me to be, the chocolate baby in the family. So all of my other siblings and mom are very fair skinned, freckles, red hair, like the whole to do. So I would be considered the darkest one in my immediate family. And so I, explored some like articles that they were talking more about employment and hiring practices and things like that. So I was really interested, just out of sheer curiosity. I ended up doing my paper for that class on colorism and like verbal behavior. So really just looking at relational frame theory. And so my professor, or well, chair, she was just like, you should actually do this. Like, it's actually like something could be very interesting because it's not something that's out there that, people are talking about. And so as I continued to read through kind of like the colorism research, I started to dive deeper and deeper into it. And I did not get bored by it by any means. So I kept looking and exploring, and it kept just being like, oh, well, there's this avenue and this avenue. But it did come with challenges because there wasn't anything in behavior analysis. So I had to, what I consider, piecemeal these things together. So one of my first papers and studies that I wrote about was about implicit skin tone bias. And so looking at how individuals treat, so that's the basis of colorism, is that individuals are treated indifferently based off of their skin tone, primarily with the idea that individuals who are darker are treated worse or poorly in conjunction or in comparison to someone with lighter skin tone, just because their closeness to whiteness. And so then the privileges that comes with being white and also being light. And so there's that historical pathway. We go way back to slavery and the brown bag test and the field slave versus the house slave and those different very clear comparisons between skin tone, I was looking at implicit bias. And I did kind of a fun study in which I created an IRAP, so an implicit relational assessment procedure test. So I built one that was kind of mimicked off of someone else who built one based off of race. And so I built one, and then I had some people take it just to see what happened. And so that was one of the first studies I did. It did not yield great results because, one, I built it myself, so it wasn't the most sound,
Mm.
technologically sound, programming, but it was fun to do. And so, and then I needed like 200 people for this to actually give me some really good
Right.
results, and I think I
Right.
had like, I don't know, 20 or something like
Yeah.
that. So it didn't yield a lot of results, but it was interesting to kind of do, and fun. So I like I said, with colorism, there's no one lane, and so you can
Mm.
really take this path to talk about it in any capacity. I chose Black women, but I've talked to individuals who talked about colorism in Indian culture and Asian culture and Latin culture. Like it transcends globally, and it's not
Mm.
something that is specific to one particular
Right.
culture. So that creates, again, a lot of conversation for the impact that it has on individuals and what to do about it. And so that
Yeah.
was my focus on we know that it's there, but now what? What do we do now?
Yeah.
How do we try to minimize the impact that it has on people? Especially
Mm.
when you hear stories and you hear kind of like testimonies from younger people who are, their colorism or these acts of colorism happening by their family members. And so
Mm.
it makes it a lot harder for them to adjust to, when people are doing it in the community, when they're having it every day in their day-to-day life. So
Yeah. Is the sort of theme of proximity to whiteness, is that the consistent theme sort of across different groups? Is it all go back to whiteness and sort of the closer, or is it always
yeah,
looked that way?
so if you think historically, we're talking about like the time of slavery, we're talking about if you're white, you have privilege. And so by being close to white. And so for many individuals who were Black, and they were that close to white, or that light that they were able to pass as being white, and in many cases, then they
Mm.
were able to gain privilege and access to things
Right.
that individuals who had darker skin were not able to gain
Got it.
access to. And so if you think about that as yes, it's a history, it's in the past, but those same ideas and those same desire to have privilege also carries through families and through
Mm-hmm.
lineage and through teachings, because now maybe I could have been the grandma who was able to pass because I was that light, but now I'm gonna teach my kids, "Hey, you're in the sun too long. You need to come back in the house. You're gonna get too dark.
Mm.
Hey,
Yeah.
hey, you need to not marry that really dark man because you're gonna have dark kids. You need to marry someone who is as light as you or white so that your kids can remain light." Because again, I've already experienced that privilege, and so I know, and I'm able to
Mm.
differentiate that I had privilege in someone else, maybe in my family
Mm.
or friends, or did not have that privilege, and I want to keep that privilege, because who ultimately does not want to keep privilege? Like, that's insane to
Mm.
be like, "Oh, no, I don't wanna have any privilege. I'm good with just," so those things carry along through, family dynamics. And like I said, and in my case, we're talking about language, so how that language kinda carries on when we talk
Mm.
about, "Hey, you're getting too dark, get out the sun," or maybe you need to bleach your skin because that's gonna give you access to a husband who has more money, or you're going to be seen as more beautiful. In Indian culture, you have the fair and lovely. That's where it started.
Mm.
If you want to be lovely, you need to be fair. You need
Mm.
to have lighter skin, so you need to bleach your skin. And so all of those things kind of play into not just the language, but what we see on TV, what we know from our family, and what we learn. And so those things kind of carry on and pass down. So that proximity to whiteness is ultimately where it started, because of that level of privilege that's gained from that, just simply just being light. It wasn't about behavior or your status or your job or your money. It was just that alone was allowed some individuals access at that time.
Can you go back and just explain your sort of you talk about the origins and some of the origins in slavery related to this black bag thing and something else. Can you tell me about those two
Oh yeah,
themes a bit?
the brown
Brown
bag
bag. Sorry.
test.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so that's kind of how they gauged how black you were, or how much black you had in you, or how much access you can have. Can you get into this very exclusive club? But they test your skin against a brown paper bag. So
Wow.
if your skin was darker than that, then the answer would be no. You did not have
Wow.
access. You did not have privilege. But if your skin was lighter, then yes, you could. But again, there are black people who are very fair skinned, and so
Mm-hmm.
they are able to gain access in that capacity. And then if you're talking about house slaves versus field
Yeah.
slaves were primarily known to be those who are darker, and those are darker, stronger, more brute, that kind
Mm.
of those labels or ideologies
Mm.
that were factored. And those who were in the house were traditionally lighter, because either they may have been lighter because they were raped by the slave master, and their
Right.
children yielded lighter skinned kids, and they got to be not in the sun because that would make them darker. So again, it kind of goes back to some of those historical references that still hold true today. And so you hear it. I don't know that everyone knows that that's kind of where the start, maybe not even the start, but where it
Yeah.
came
Well,
from.
it made me wonder, sort of going even further back, and
Mhm.
is it probably safe to say that if you go sort of back to sort of pre-colonization, that most of the black folks were generally darker?
Yes, it's possible. Yeah.
Or I mean, who knows? I mean, I guess more of the question is a lot of the reason for the more fairer skinned folks because of the effect of of rape and other things like that, by slavery and whatnot, by white folks, and sort of the breeding and whatnot.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean,
Yeah.
I think overall, from what I've read, it's kind of where most of it happened. So, because
Mm.
even if you look at places like, I believe it's Brazil, they have their
Mm.
caste system, and their hierarchy is based on solely that. It's based
Mm.
off of intentionally whitening their race by having children with white individuals so that they're still Brazilian, but they are
Wow.
of a different caste and a different hierarchy. And so the goal for them, and for many of them, particularly maybe not necessarily now, but then, was to whiten their lineage so that they could have more privilege and they can score on a different part of the hierarchy.
Mm.
So who's to say, you know, if that was happening then, or what that was like
Sure.
at that point. But those are some of the behaviors that we know
Mm.
were happening during that time period, that
Yeah. Yeah.
has again carried over and
Yeah.
lasted a lifetime at this point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lasted many years.
Yeah, crazy. And so obviously still present today. What kinds of sort of behaviors are folks sort of engaging in order to sort of, you talked about bleaching, and what is bleaching? Is that literally bleach, or what's happening
So
there?
it comes in different forms. And so
The second secret word is tulip.
I don't know if you have, because you're in Vancouver, right? So I don't know if you guys have they're named beauty supply stores here. And so that's like
Mm.
where all like the hair products and things like that you can get. So I don't know if that would equate into your region, but in the States, we have beauty supply stores. And even if you go there, there's an aisle that has bleaching creams,
Mm.
soaps, shampoos, like body wash. And so there it is, they do have chemicals in it in which the skin gets lighter
Mm.
as a result of utilizing it over and over again. So it does require um, a lot of exposure to it and a lot
Mm.
of use, but obviously it comes with a lot of toxins and a lot of,
Right.
issues that come with bleaching your skin. And and so, excuse me. And so there are a lot of cultures who you see skin bleaching happening a lot, particularly if you're looking in African cultures. They do a lot of skin bleaching in some countries within Africa. It's very prominent. And so, but again, it comes with this idea that you're more beautiful, or you have more access, or you can find a better husband, or a husband that has more money if your
Yeah.
skin is lighter. And again, that's not I don't want to make a blanket statement that that's across, all cultures in Africa
Mm-hmm,
and these things,
mm-hmm,
but it
mm-hmm.
is very prominent in a lot of African culture. But also, again, like we talked about, Fair and Lovely, that's in India, so that also happens. That's where it originated, so that's happening there as well. So a lot of cultures do engage in skin bleaching, and so there are some health risks, obviously, as it
Right.
relates to it, and so it is very, very dangerous practice, but that doesn't mean that individuals are not using it. So it's not necessarily bleached like we use to clean our
Mm,
clothes, but it is the same concept of, again, but it happens with constant exposure. They have to use it over and over again.
mm,
But again, it comes in soaps and creams and almost any form that you want, anything that you can lather, lotions, it's all there. And sometimes they label it as having turmeric or some kind of natural stuff that's in there, but it's still dangerous. And that's definitely one of the more dangerous behaviors that people engage in, if they, want to have lighter skin. Again, but we also see behavior change, like, again, staying out of the sun or
right.
intentionally not going out in the summer or wearing clothes that cover their skin so that they are not
Mm,
exposed to getting darker. And so even if it means that they are interrupting maybe their daily routine or,
mm-hmm.
interrupting something that could be happening, those things are in the forefront of their mind, like, oh, well, I'm not going to stay outside too long because I don't want my skin to get darker. And it's
Yeah.
kind of sad to
Yeah.
think that people would, alter what they're doing or stop their fun just because they don't want to either get a tan or,
Yeah. Yeah.
get darker, so to speak. But yeah, there are a lot of different things that individuals may engage in. And then also it's just some things that overlap with like the race thing in regards to care and education. And so there are statistics that talk about individuals who are fair skinned getting more of a lesser sentence if they're jailed, and or
Wow.
maybe if if you're hired at a higher rate than, so you might be hired at a higher rate than someone who has darker skin, or you may face less disciplinary actions as a student even as early
I was
for,
wondering. Yeah.
yeah, so for Black children as early as kindergarten you see that change and that shift. And like this kid is 5 and they have lighter skin, so they may face less disciplinary actions in school if
Hmm.
they behave a certain way versus a kid who has darker skin.
Mm-hmm.
So it does permeate a lot of different areas of life, and it's not just singly this, relationships, or it has impacts that, you know, impact people's money and their
Mm.
access to activities or things to do, or, again, being punished more harshly because they have darker skin. But it's all about our biases that we have, and whether or not we act upon them, it doesn't mean that they don't exist. And so there is that difference that we have them. We don't have to engage in discriminatory practices, but they are there. So it's more so just about having that awareness and knowing what to do about it and being able to recognize it for sure.
All right. So what were you said you were looking at sort of more verbal behavior in your
Mhm.
research, and so tell me a little bit more about that.
So I looked at colorism from the lens of relational frame theory. So looking at how colorist language and how colorist behavior can or was built across with just language, keeping language in mind.
Hmm.
And so I generally I like to use Disney because everybody knows Disney. It's pretty universal. And so one of the examples that I used within my paper was about Disney characters. So if you look at all the villains in Disney characters, they have dark skin,
Mm-hmm.
they have dark hair, dark
Yes.
eyes. And so one element of colorism is this idea of featureism, which means the features are of someone are equivalent to what would be dark, the same.
Mm-hmm.
And so even their aura, their clothing, everything is dark around them. And so if I can give you an array and you can point out, I guarantee you would tell me which one was the villain, even without
Mm-hmm.
seeing the movie itself, because there's a pattern of that. And so when we talk about naming these things, we talk about being a villain, being a bad guy. But what we learn through relational frame theory is that we learn those things and we build language around what we've learned. So
Mm-hmm.
if this dark character with dark eyes and dark hair and dark skin is the bad guy, then by opposition, who's the good guy? Who's
Mm-hmm.
the person who's the hero, the
Right.
individual who has light skin,
Sure.
light eyes, light hair. And so whether or not that happens specifically in that context, it's possible. And those things happen. Again, that's just one example. You can talk about, Santa Claus is always white and he's great. But then you have, these other things that's always seen
Mm-hmm.
as bad. You have the black cats, but black cats
Yep.
have this association. And so when you talk about black, you think dark. And when you talk about white, you think white. And those are things that we've learned, and not because we're learning it to be, engage in colorism or racism. We just learn it because that's just a part of our language. And
Hmm.
so how that kind of extends beyond those things and turns into how we see. So now
Mm.
I can take that context of that villain, and then maybe in that same breath I see this someone that maybe looks like me or darker. I might think, well, you look a little bit like Ursula.
Right.
You got the long hair and the dark skin and all those things, and so why would I not think that you might be evil or treat me bad or try to manipulate me or do all the things that Ursula did?
Of
And
course.
so in the sense of language, we talk about how we label these things, how we identify them, how we name them ultimately. And so we're always talking about how that language is built from those kind of core things that we have and how those things are extended beyond to have this difference between light and dark or black and white, and ultimately shifting over to colorism for that happens again, all individuals. Actually I was speaking to the class of one of my colleagues and cohort members, and I told them the story about, and then I laughed because I said, oh, well, this is what I mean. So my kids had these little jewels and they were pink, and one was a light pink and one was a hot pink or dark pink color. And so my son, he had the dark pink one. And so I named it dark pink. I said, oh, you have the dark pink one. And then I told him, put it away. It's time for bed, whatever. So the morning comes and he says, oh, where's my jewel? And I gave him the lighter one, the light pink one. He says, oh, well, I don't want that. No, well, I'm sorry. I gave him the dark one. And he said, I don't want the black one. I said, but it's not black, it's pink. He said, no, I don't want the black one. I want that, the light one. So he took
Wow.
my dark pink and made it black.
Made it black. Amazing. And
But
scary.
right. And so I was like, oh, well, buddy, it's not black. It's just hot. So I had to change the language to say it's hot pink, because I'm like, he's doing this as a 4-year-old and changing dark to black just with, and we're not even talking about those colors. And so I can imagine if I don't reframe it for him, that just one little piece can can continue to spiral and build networks. I mean, that's what relational frame theory is about, like building networks of language based off of what we learn, what's reinforced
Mm-hmm.
and what's punished. And we continue to do those things based off of these frames that are formed in different capacities. So I'm just like, that was like, it was funny to me, but eye opening that someone as young as he can, take something so simple and say, I don't want the black one. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah, and that's all
okay.
language, because it makes me think about something I've always thought about. Makes me think with the color thing, and I love your sort of Disney sort of parallel. It may not be that every time these characters were created that it was necessarily coming from a racist lens.
Mhm.
Because I mean, there's also this sort of idea of light and dark in terms of daylight and nighttime, and
Mhm.
and all of
Yep.
the scary monsters come out at night, and all of the happy people come out in the daytime.
Mhm.
And that didn't necessarily all stem, it might have actually, in hindsight, it might have stemmed from sort of
Maybe.
racial bias and sort of the creation of sort of these ideas. But it's also possible that it just came from sort of daylight and nighttime and some other thing.
Mhm.
But the fact remains is that now dark is now associated with that, and it
Mhm.
just took a few sentences here and there to suddenly connect that to dark people.
Yep, absolutely. And so that's the thing that we learn very quickly. We make these relations pretty quick. It doesn't necessarily take a lot of time. Again, whether we act on them or we do something about it is a whole different aspect, but it doesn't mean that they don't exist. And so really what I was talking about in my paper is more so that this, like, if we talk about colorism strictly from language, strictly from verbal behavior, and thinking about keeping relational frame theory in mind, it's easy to conceptualize that these things could happen very quickly. And then all of a sudden I'm labeling this employer, well, they have a bad attitude.
Right.
They're very aggressive. But then I can label and name someone else as, oh, well, they're just standing up for themselves. They're an advocate.
Hmm. Hmm.
The information the delivery could be the same. Is how I received it, but now I'm also naming it. And that naming now teaches the next person to name it the same way. It teaches the person who heard me say this to believe the same thing or learn that. And again, it doesn't take much to carry these things along. Just
Hmm.
all you need is to be reinforced by it. And what we know about reinforcement is that it continues to move that behavior along.
So how did you kind of design your study? What does it look like?
Remember I told you that piecemeal part. And so because I didn't have a lot to go off of, I almost struggled in the beginning. And I would tell you that it took me quite some time to get to a place where I just had to make a decision. And that just came from, my committee saying, we can do this a lot of different ways, but you just have to just commit to one, just make a decision. And so I finally made a decision to do a mixed method. So I did a qualitative and a quantitative
Cool.
aspect of the study. So because of course, this is behavior analysis and people want numbers. They don't want to talk about experiences so much. So I use that to have the individuals in my study write samples. Like they had to write out basically this narrative about their experiences, and they had prompts in order to do so. And what I did was I used that to pull out this, what I consider self-criticizing language based off of their skin tone and or self-compassionate language. And ultimately I was looking to see if I could increase their self-compassionate language through mindfulness and perspective taking. So that was the overall goal. So I took those as my intervention in order to see if I can shift. So I really looked at their language and how they use their words with or without jargon or, some cultural references. And so that was the one element. The other element is that I also took their language and I did a thematic analysis. So I wanted to see if there were themes throughout these individuals who are not related. The group was a little bit homogenous based off of like the age range. And also the region. Everybody was mostly East Coast and, adjacent. So not many people from, other parts of the country or the world. So, but I really wanted to see if these individuals had some themes that were similar, that were coming up, that were the same. And so that was the second piece, was to look at this. So I'm looking at the same exact sample, but I'm doing two different things with it. And I was able to really get an idea of if that language had shifted and if it was more self-compassionate based off of the interventions or the things that I had them do. Like I said, that were based in mindfulness and perspective taking. Excuse me.
Right on. So who were your sort of participants?
So they had to be Black women who experienced, or they self-described as experiencing colorism within the last year of when I was recruiting. And then I didn't have a particular age range, but I did have a particular age range. I did not want someone who was, I think it might have been 21, but I also didn't want someone who was like in their over 50, because I didn't want individuals to be able to take their new experience and relate it back to something that we know was when, the racial world and all of those kind of bigger events were happening. I didn't want those things to carry over. And I thought to myself, like, my mom is in her 70s. So I'm like, if someone in their 70s or 60s, she's almost 70, I think. Yeah, she's almost 70. If someone, my mom's 65 to 70 age were to come, my mother has a very clear memory of what it was like to be in that time of MLK and, all of those racial things that were happening during that time. She was a very young kid, but she still has a good memory of like those things. So I didn't want anyone of that same age or older to carry over those things that they've experienced as a younger kid and bring them here. I really wanted it to be, kind of a little bit neutral. And so I'm like, at my age, I wouldn't be able to reference those things specifically from my experience. I would know it through storytelling and things like that. But so I did keep it to that kind of that 20, 25 year age gap. And so that also again comes with its own challenges because individuals have a different, someone who's 21 is talking about things a lot different than someone who's like 45, 50. So that was kind of like the breakdown of the individuals, but they were all individuals who identified as Black women. They did not have to be of a certain skin tone. And so I did have one individual. Most individuals were or self-identified because obviously I didn't identify them myself besides our first initial meeting, but I let them self-identify on the scale. So they self-identified as being somewhere between medium and darker skin tone. I did have one individual who identified herself as being a lighter skinned Black woman. And so it was also interesting to read her perspective and her experience on things in comparison to the other individuals within the study. So if I were to do a separate analysis of just her writing sample, it would be a little bit different. But I did identify some of the outliers based off of like what she said and her perspective because it didn't make things a little bit different because again, she had a different perspective on how colorism impacted her life than the other individuals who were of darker skin tone. So yeah, so that was the general setup. It was also I did do a experimental group and a control group. So there were those two different, so it was a group design. It was not a single subject design, which, again, very true to ABA and behavior analysis. And so I did push myself outside of my traditional box to learn all these things. I did statistical analysis. Now, don't ask me about those because that's something you use it when you need it, and then you take it.
I wouldn't even know how to ask the question anyway. It's all good.
You don't store statistics in your brain. I can tell you about the results, but I could not tell you which ones I did specifically and how. But they were all useful in some capacity because I did need to do them for the thematic analysis part and things like that.
So what were some of the key findings like regarding the impact of colorism on their mental health?
So I did see, so one of the interesting things was that both groups, the control group and experimental group, when we're looking at the numbers as far as like their frequency of self-compassion and self-criticizing statement, were pretty similar during the pretest aspect of it, but there was a very interesting shift during the post-test. So I did see a decrease in self-criticizing statements and an increase in self-compassionate statements for the experimental group, which was great. But I also saw an increase in self-criticizing statements and an increase in self-compassionate statements for the control group. So you can imagine this graph for the control group is here, and then it almost doubles, like it mirrors going right up. And I thought about it, like, what's the reason? Why is this happening? And so I did, look into the research a little bit about it. And a lot of it kind of spoke to like resiliency and wanting to counterbalance and counteract some of these statements that I'm making. So the more I made self-criticizing statements, I tried to make just as many self-compassionate statements in order to try to find this balance between the two. And so that's what we saw. We saw that kind of doubling effect where it continued. They made more, but it didn't stop them from making the self-criticizing statements on a higher scale. And so we did see that that move. And it made sense though, because it's like if I'm talking kind of bad about myself, I want people to know that, but I still love myself. I may not like the fact that my skin is dark, but I still love me, and so you still saw that same kind of language, and which was expected. It wasn't expected that they were both going to go up, but it was expected that they would have somewhat of the same level of self-criticizing statements, just because they didn't get the actual intervention. So the idea was that they would be kind of at the same place that they were when they first started. It was just really interesting to see that. From the thematic analysis standpoint, it was very interesting to see that all of the women, regardless of their group, had these two themes that were kind of consistent across both. It was like this desire to be valued and wanted. And then it was also the colorist language and kind of like these colloquialisms. So primarily happening from their family. So they all talked about how their family, really pushed the envelope in some capacity,
Mm,
as it relates to their skin tone, whether it was through comments or remarks or just some kind of statement about, again, being called a chocolate baby might be a term of endearment,
sure.
but maybe it wasn't for some people, or it made them feel like, they were a standout, or what we consider the black sheep.
Yes,
So,
of
all
course.
these things that we talk about these things, and I don't want you to be hyper vigilant like I am, Ben, because sometimes I hear things and I'm like, oh, that's funny. But things like that, like, oh, they're the black sheep of the family. Well, that makes you feel like you're the outsider.
Hmm.
And so I did see like those two themes kind of stay true throughout. And so it really kind of spoke to this shared experience of Black women that regardless of where you are, your age, there are these things that if you identify, because again, it wasn't me telling them, hey, you experience colorism. I'm asking you if you felt as though you did,
Hmm.
providing you with the basic definition of what colorism is. I'm just asking you if you felt you experienced colorism, then join the study. And so if these individuals are saying, hey, I felt as though I experienced colorism, and they're also talking about these shared experiences, it kind of speaks to like these are generally some shared experiences that a lot of Black
Hmm.
women could share if they again identify if they were able to identify that that was a
Yeah.
colorist experience. And not all people, we try to give a lot of experiences the benefit of the doubt, like, maybe that wasn't based off of race, or maybe that wasn't based off of skin, or maybe they're just having a bad day. We try to provide
Hmm.
rationale for a lot of different experiences.
Hmm.
So if you're able to self-identify that, that could be one element that, you can speak on, which is again, wanting to be valued, whether it was at work or within your relationship or
Mm,
within your family dynamic.
yeah.
But also with that, the experimental group for the thematic analysis did show a shift in their language where, again, they did engage in more self compassionate language. They also talked a lot about just being valued and wanting to share that information with other people. So, like, hey, you know, these are my experiences, but I don't want my kid to experience this. So I'm going to do this a little bit different, or I'm going to talk about this in a different way. So we did see, this pride for their skin tone. Oh, I love my skin, even though I might experience this, this is something that, we really wanted to see, which I was happy to kind of see that shift in that, in that language overall. And I think a lot of it had to do with the combination of mindfulness and perspective taking as kind of like a treatment package overall. I don't know that one by itself would have done. And so again, limitation. I did not isolate them to find out. I wanted to be done with my dissertation. So we did not do that. But if I were to run the study again, I would probably see if those things as an individual treatment would make a difference or change up how individuals discuss things.
Yeah. Did you notice, because you mentioned you're talking about sort of how some folks were able to explain their experiences with their families growing up and how they were,
Hmm.
how those interactions went on. Did you notice that if maybe there were some folks that had, more of that verbal behavior happening in the context of their family than engaged in more self-criticizing statements, where maybe folks that had families where, colorism, the idea of colorism didn't come up and you're good the way you are or whatever
Yeah.
type language affect things?
I didn't look at it very specifically, but I will tell you off of memory, the majority talked about it from their family aspect. And it necessarily wasn't their core family. Sometimes it was
Mm,
their cousins, it was their
sure.
extended family, it could have been their
Right.
aunts. And so I would say the majority had some reference into some capacity about their family experience and how mostly relating it back to, yeah, I experienced this, whatever this event was within the last year. And this was their reminder. Like it took them back to this place where their cousin told them, you're too Black to be in this family, or, like, you're too dark to be in this family. Like, why are you adopted? Because you're the darkest person here. And so it was more of a reference back to those things and not necessarily, talking about it in the current sense, but more of like, this reminded me of when blah 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 blah, because again I'm asking them to do a narrative, and so they're just free kind of free writing. And so that was also an element that was sometimes difficult because some people spoke heavily on their current experience, like what they had experienced within the last year, which was the focus. But they also, some people reared off to being like, oh, this reminded me of this, or I also experience, they're adding like a little bit extra sauce on it. So it's a part of their writing. So I was able to utilize it because I guess it still stayed within the standards of the criteria. But most of them often talked about their family in some capacity and referenced those being something that reminded them of that experience. Or one individual actually said that she was able to clearly identify that it was colorism because
Mm,
of her experience as a kid. So it was like, I knew that was colorism,
right.
not that I had to question or was like, I wonder. And so again, you saw that little bit of a difference where some individuals just said like, oh, I'm not sure if it was, but this is how it made me feel. And this is why I thought it was. And some of them was like, no, that was because my grandmother used to say, these things about X, Y, and Z. So it was very interesting to hear. And a lot of them had them in different capacities. Some talked about it in the sense of work, some in the sense of dating. And so their experience with like going on dates or being set up for blind dates and, how individuals either approached them or had discussions with them or, may have
Mm,
referenced things about them that made them feel uncomfortable. Or so there was a lot of different types of experiences. And so it was just it was kind of sad. It is kind of sad to hear these who you want to say like all people are beautiful, and they talk about themselves in such ways that are very negative and um putting themselves down just because of what someone else said about them. And so one of the ways that obviously in the study I had to do IOA, and so
mm,
my IOA, I was actually kind of nervous because I was like, what if I'm picking up on these things because I really want things to be true,
mm,
Because obviously as a Black woman, I can probably relate to some of those things. And even if it's not in the sense of
mhm,
colorism, I might just relate to like life experiences that are shared culturally. And so I was like, oh, I don't know. But I would say that the majority of I did a IOA for every single instance. So every part of every number had IOA. Every thematic analysis had an IOA as well. And so I try to get as much overlap to see, again, just making sure it's not me just, taking this information and running off with it.
right.
Now, IOA yielded pretty well. There were some that were what one would consider below that 80% idea.
Mhm,
And most of that was because there was one there might have been one trial that did not match up. So they weren't significantly low. It might have been 70 something percent, but it was like a one trial difference, um, which made me feel a little bit better. And so, and my IOA partner was a Latina woman actually.
mm,
And so, and I was like, okay, she could also have some of those shared experiences with colorism, but it wouldn't have been specific to like the Black experience. So I'm like, okay,
mm,
she's seeing these same things. Obviously, I'm training her to be objective and to collect the IOE data. And so to see it, I was like, okay, that made me feel better. Like, other people are seeing the same thing that I'm seeing when it comes to that. And also the thematic analysis had to go through IOE data as well. So
mm.
it did help me feel better
It's
about
an
like not.
interesting point. I mean, it's cool you did it that way. I'm wondering how often the concept of bias comes into sort of choosing
Mhm.
IOA folks. Often it's just sort of, the available grad student in the cohort or whatever that can, kind of help out because they're also working on their project
Mhm.
or maybe the master's student or whoever's available. When you're talking about sort of observations related to sort of, these sorts of themes around colorism, racism, and sexism, and so on, having two people that are both affected by that phenomena could potentially skew your data quite a bit.
Yeah.
And was that intentional that you had a Latino woman doing that, or it just worked out?
I think it just worked out, but it was a conversation after the fact. So obviously in the defense, I have to defend, all all
Sure.
aspects of why I made choices and what
Yeah.
I did and the results that came to. And so one of the questions was about my IOA data and the fact that again I had a couple of the aspects that were lower, specifically in the self-criticizing statement for I think two different categories and maybe two different groups as well. Like I said, most of it was pretty good. And so one of my committee members questioned, well, you have this low IOA. Like, how do we know? And, one of the things I had to talk about was the fact that, yes, this was, but it was only a one trial difference. So if I'm having these fairly low number of trials, we're not talking about
Mm,
20 trials. We're talking about maybe 8 or 9 different
right.
trials. And so if I'm one off, that's going to take that number down a big amount of points so that it drops under that goal. But I also talked about the fact that the culture and the background of my IOA partner and the fact that some of those references, if we're talking about jargon, could not have been something like I would have said it was self-criticizing because maybe it was specific to Black culture. She may not have thought or felt as though it was criticizing. And because I'm using jargon, within the definition, I'm saying, hey, I can use jargon and or cultural references and with or without those things. Again, that is my perception, but that could not have been her same shared experience or her same thought process when reading these, again, very pretty long, lengthy descriptions of people's experiences. So, and that was the one element of the IOA data is that in order to score it, you needed to read the whole passage. You couldn't just take the one line without context and score it singularly. You had to score it through the context of the whole passage. So again, depending on someone's perspective, their lived experiences, or like you said, their biases, that could determine if they think that's self-criticizing or self-compassionate. They may say, oh, well, this was a regular statement. But I might say, there's some very specific statements that are used in like Black culture that says like bold and beautiful. And like somebody else might just say, oh, I think I'm bold and beautiful. But for us, that's a sign of being like, I'm bold and beautiful. Like those are things that are kind of like a part of that culture. Now, granted, I don't know if that was the one statement. I'm just using that as an example. I use the fact that there was this cultural difference that could have impacted, so it could go both ways, right? It can impact the bias that I get a great score because we have shared experience, or it can impact the bias because we're two different cultures, and so these statements and these cultural references may not be relevant, or it may not stand out as much as someone else who's of a different culture. And so I actually used it in my defense that we were of different culture as a benefit of why my IOA score was low in those two different areas. I think you bring up a good point, though. It could definitely, when we're talking about things that are, like you said, very motivated by experience and culture, you never know how that's going to shift how people interpret information or data. Yeah. Mhm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna tell you that I don't know that I've seen much of that. I remember one particular art. Now I don't remember the particular article, but I do remember reading an article, and it was based on, I believe it was the article that was talking about Black representation in ABA, and I can't remember the exact study, but I remember them actually talking specifically about the IOA partners because and they also talked a lot about the actual researchers and their background because they wanted to show either their shared experiences or the differences or things like that. I even had my chair tell me, she told me when I was picking my other committee member, she was like, not to be funny, but what's the background of the of these people? Because I don't think doing a study on colorism, you should have an all white committee. And she's a white woman. And so she's like, I don't think that would be a good representation of like people being able to look at this information objectively if they don't have that lens. And so I ended up having a white woman, a black male, and a Latino woman as my committee members. And so I had a nice mix, and they all had different. My chair was very heavy into verbal behavior, relational frame theory. My second reader, who was the male, he was more into the historical reference. And so we talked a lot about, that historical aspect and slavery and how those things and colonialism and how those things kind of trickle down. And then my third reader, she kind of gave me the insight. Her study was mostly on the racial bias and implicit bias of race. So her aspects and her focus was a little bit more on that. So I had a well-rounded committee that had different, which was in some capacities a little tough when the defense came around because again, they were looking for different things. And so some were looking for, some different aspects to be clear. So, we just had to go with it. But it was overall a good experience. I think I would definitely do the study again just because I would want to see if those things would occur again, if like the same results would happen. But also would be interested to look at the thematic analysis and see if those things are similar as well. I'm gonna say yes, but I'm not gonna say yes because people will come for me. They're like, "You're not the." Yeah, they're not the first. I'm gonna say I'm one, if not the first, yes, to look at colorism in regards to applied behavior analysis. Um, so yeah, I did. I ended up taking my dissertation and publishing it in the Journal of Colorism Studies. No, 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 nope, nope, nope. So I'm gonna say yes, but like someone will dig up something from like 1945. Yeah, absolutely. So there are quite a few individuals who do a lot of research in colorism and a wide variety. And so there's one particular researcher who's Dr. Ronald E. Hall. He does a big bulk of the colorism research, and not just in Black culture. He's kind of going everywhere and talking to everyone. And so I actually had the opportunity to, when I was kind of in the development phase of like my dissertation, I reached out to him like cold email, "Hey, I'm doing this. Like, can we chat?" And so I was able to talk to him and kind of get his insight on, all the number of years he's done research, but also just kind of get some insight on if I'm looking at it from this verbal behavior lens. Did he think it was like a valid way of approaching colorism, or is it worth talking about? And so I got really good feedback from him in regards to that. And so that definitely helped me move forward with kind of saying, okay, let's just do, let's just do it and stop going around in these circles about what I should do and let's change this and what about this? And, no study is perfect. So really just kind of nailing it down. So he's definitely one of the individuals who I read a lot of his research during the time of me kind of just exploring it, but there are a couple other individuals who do not come to mind right now, but they are doing a lot of research and continue to do research as it relates mostly to education, and social work. And so a lot of the colorism conversation is in social work, education, and some in as it relates to like I said, hiring practices and kind of like that aspect, which mostly kind of overlaps with psychology or things like that. I really would like to get into the area of relationships and like I actually met this woman who's a marriage and family therapist, and we had a good conversation about the dynamic between relationships and individuals who are of different skin tone that are, on different ends of the spectrum and how their relationship, I guess, like, roles in their relationship and, like, identified or we talked about, like, the language aspect too, about, like, things people say to each other, particularly when they're angry and, like, that aspect. So I would be interested in seeing how it goes there. But colorism is mostly in education and social work. And so, um, I'm hoping that it could, you know, spiral into behavior analysis and also like contextual behavior science. So again, looking at more of that RFT and even looking at ACT to see how ACT can fit in with that would be beneficial as well. Yeah, some of them is a lot of a little bit of confusion. So I did do a poster at the Louisiana, the Coast conference last year. And so that was the first time that I actually talked about my study to other behavior analysts. So I did the colorism conference and that was last August. And then I did that conference in October, I believe, October, November. And so that was the first time. And they were just like, we never thought about that as being, and so it was more so just like a, like not confusion that they didn't understand, but confusion that they just didn't think that that was like an area or angle to look at things from. Because I think again, most of us talk about social justice as it relates to racism. And so even like Dr. Hall, who I was talking about, he in one of his interviews or some article I believe that he did, he talked about this idea that we should be looking at skin tone as kind of the catalyst for change instead of race, because race can change and we can identify as different races. But one thing that is, unless you engage in skin bleaching or excessive tanning, one thing that's pretty permanent and salient is our skin tone. And so why not look at how we can approach race through skin, and not necessarily focus on black, white, or indifferent, but look at the skin tone and the preference and the treatment that way. And so I was like, right, exactly. And so that's what he really emphasizes that fact that we should really be shifting away from race and shifting more into skin tone, because those are the things that are not going to be able to change, particularly if we're talking about how, again, how individuals identify and they self-identify, and depending on their skin tone, they may be able to change their identity and change their race if they make a choice. And so actually, ironically enough, that made sense to me because I was listening to a story about I believe they may have been in Brazil. I think they were in Brazil, but it was a tour guide and talking about like, going through the different areas of the country and making a reference of her being the only white person in her family. The rest of her family is black. I was like, but I guess. And so again, if you say so, I mean, maybe you're black too, and or they're white too. Like, I don't know, but she based it off of her skin tone and identified herself as being white and the rest of her family being black. So, but again, not Brazilian. So, not based off of the ethnicity. So it just like those things kind of continue to point to the reason why skin tone is pretty important. So I'm hoping to so I'm gonna present at ACBS, so the Association of Contextual Behavior Science, and next month. So that'll be my first time at that conference, and I'm doing a separate panel about racial bias, but I'm also doing my poster there for the colorism poster. And so I'm interested in talking to people in that realm about how I derived to all of these, what some might think are just like out there kind of things, but I think they have some relevance. So. Mhm. Mm, right, right. Mhm. So, yeah, no, and I think that ultimately was my hope. My hope wasn't like I'm not here to solve this big grandiose problem. Hopefully, for me, my goal was to really just have the conversation and push the envelope that behavior analysis doesn't have to be in this singular box, but also doesn't have to always. I feel like also while I'm talking about race and racial justice and social justice as a whole, think sometimes that doesn't people have their own ideologies about it already, and it doesn't push people to think about it differently because they've already said, "Well, I don't see color because I don't see black and white," or but there are different elements within that spectrum of color that you can see and that we can act on in the realm of colorism. But I think sometimes thinking about things a little bit differently will help, like you said, you're fighting anti-black racism, but there could also still be these biases that's there. Again, not intentionally, but by all means, it could possibly exist. And like you said, I really just hope people want to think about things a little bit differently and think a little bit outside of the box. That we don't have to just focus on race, and we don't have to just focus on ethnicity or where people come from. We could look at things from a different perspective and really see how we treat people, and also how we name and label and describe people, because most importantly for me, it's about that, like, again, that verbal behavior and what we're saying about people or labeling things because they could, particularly young children. I told you a prime example with my own kids. How we label things are important because, again, not intentionally, but they can go and build more things that can be more problematic later if they stick around for too long or they have some negative impact. I appreciate it. Yes, absolutely. And then we have to have the conversation about adult services, I'm telling you. No problem. Thank you so much, Ben, for having me. I appreciate it. Hi, my name is Dr. Danielle Jeudy. Do you live in the Middlesex County area of New Jersey and are interested in becoming a registered behavior technician? If the answers are yes, I have exciting news for you. There is a new RBT course at Middlesex College in Edison, New Jersey that starts this fall. This 12-week hybrid course will not only provide you with the 40 hours needed to take the RBT exam, but will provide you with comprehensive hands-on learning experience so that you can enter the workforce confident and confident. To register, go to middlesexcollege.edu and select the course under lifelong learning. Hope to see you there.
The third secret word is major. Continue the conversation with these episodes of Behavior Speak. Episode 223, Building Community and Behavior Analysis with Dr. Jewel Parham. Episode 214, Cultural Humility and Behavior Analysis with Quintera Tucker. Episode 136, From Bias to Balance, Anti-Racism and Behavior Analysis with Dr. Sonia Levy. And episode 68, Racism, Feminism, and Behavior Analysis in Brazil with Dr. Tacita Medrado Misael. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok and subscribe to our YouTube page at Behavior Speak. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.